Oh, hey there. Welcome to the Nerdy About Nature Podchat series, where I sit down with folks from different backgrounds and experiences to chat all about things pertaining to nature. My name is Ross, and this podcast is an extension of a passion project I started called Nerdy About Nature, which also includes tons of fun educational videos all over Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and basically everywhere else on the internet. Now, all that I create here serves as a means to inspire, educate, and engage folks with the outdoor world so that we can all become better stewards of it, have a little bit more fun when we're out enjoying it, and work to create a more inclusive, diverse, equitable, and just future for each and every one of us in this world that we all share. Because nature, it sure is pretty neat, and I think we should keep it that way. So come on, let's go get nerdy.
Come and take a nature walk with me. We're gonna check out some really cool trees. We're gonna hang around and talk about all those things in nature that we can't live without. Let's go get nerdy, yeah, let's get nerdy about nature. Nerdy, yeah, let's get nerdy about nature, baby. Nerdy, yeah, let's get nerdy about nature. Come on, let's get nerdy about nature.
Well, funny seeing you here, you old son of a beach. Welcome back to another episode of the Nerd About Nature Podchat series. My name is Ross, I'm your host, and in case you couldn't tell from those terrible, awful, horrible puns, today's episode is one that is nautical by nature. I sat down and spoke with Fred, also known as the Orca Man, last summer. It was in August or September, I believe. You may know Fred. You may have seen him online. He has a very famous Instagram channel called The Orca Man, where he does a lot of different social media education and outreach and news on things happening with orcas or killer whales all around the world, but especially those populations here that are kind of local to the bioregion. So that's the southern resident killer whales and the transient killer whales. And we sat down, watched the sunset over the kind of harbor there in Vancouver. It was really, really beautiful. And we chatted all about orcas, why they're so amazing, different populations of them around the world, their fascinating social structures, and the threats they face both in our home waters here in Cascadia and beyond. So really great episode we've got lined up for you here today. I hope you enjoy, and let's get into learning about some really cool killer whales. What's up?
Oh,
Welcome to the podcast.
thank you, man. I am very, very excited not only to be here with you, but also I have an excuse to come out to Spanish Banks.
Yeah, it is a beautiful night here. We are just chilling. I am roasting in the sun. I got the sun right on my face. You got it to your back. That's all good.
I'll try blocking it out for you.
Oh, thank
wherever
you.
can.
That's very kind.
The small ways.
So yeah, really pumped to have you on.
Thank you.
That's actually lovely. We need to pin that up somewhere.
If only.
So I wanted to invite you on because you are colloquially known as the Orca Man.
I appreciate the way you put that.
I mean, is that wrong?
I don't know. That is exactly correct.
Yeah.
It is definitely a name that I am known by more so than I'd say even go or went as.
So so go ahead and just introduce yourself. If you were to introduce yourself and what it is you do, how you got on this journey, tell me a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so my name is Fred, and I have been talking about killer whales online for the past 3 years, educating, informing, and trying to boost the conservation both within the Salish Sea here in the Pacific Northwest as well as across the world. Now, and with regard to the populations of orcas across the world, it looks like a whole bunch of different things. I have my own podcast where I talk about them a little bit, and then various social media channels. And only recently I've been trying and creating avenues to try and get people out closer to orcas within the Salish Sea specifically. The name The Orca Man was actually bestowed upon me by some of my initial followers. When I first started this, I was online as the Orca Maven, as the idea of a guy a person who knows a lot and just is able to share whatever information and kind of point people in the right directions. And everybody kept on saying, is this the Orca Caveman? Is this whatever? Nobody, especially too in the one Sliw, was able to see it. And then one person commented, I like your TikToks, Orca Man. And everybody kind of followed after that. That was also, I responded to that comment with a video, and that was the biggest one I did at the time. And so I was like, okay, especially too, hadn't been colloquially called the Orca Man, I was like, okay, this is the easiest way to be able to tell people what it is that I'm trying to do.
Maven is a bit of an archaic English word to use. I don't think many people really vibe with that one.
I don't think it works for Instagram.
No, I mean it works well in like a Shakespeare novel, but play or.
I think it could have worked for that, and like it a lot of the beginnings kind of aspects that I was thinking about was talking academically, historically, and like about some of the research going on. So it was supposed to be initially be very like more tied into that, and then it's definitely ebbed and flowed since.
Right. It's nice how you talked about orcas as a global species, because they are, and I feel like for a lot of people in the Pacific Northwest especially, and maybe even just North America in general, we tend to think we're very possessive about our orcas. And we think of orcas as like this Pacific Northwest thing, and like, yes, there are populations here, but this is a species that is all over the world. Are populations considered distinct subspecies, or how does that work?
This is actually an extremely exciting question. So populations across the world are broken down into the largest groups called ecotypes. So there are various ecotypes even within the Pacific Northwest. As we were talking about earlier, we have residents and we have transients. And then underneath those, there are Alaskan transients, California transients. I'll call it like Salish Sea transients that we know as quite literally just big orcas. And then the residents has the northern residents and the southern residents. So both of those communities, as the residents and the transients, are ecotypes. They're populations that have been genetically distinct for over 350,000 years. They haven't interbred in that amount of time. There's a common ancestor, like I said, around that time ago. And then around the world, you'll have different ecotypes in different pockets. So if you think about any videos that you've seen, as we all have seen, of killer whales that in Antarctica will do the wave crashing to get seals off the ice.
Right onto the beach.
Exactly. Onto the water.
Onto the ice shelves.
Yeah, exactly. And then the other whales in Patagonia who we see beaching themselves to try and get seals.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah. I'm pretty sure that was on a planet Earth or something.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's super neat, but it's also super unique to that population. And then
that's like learned behavior by those unique populations.
Exactly. And then it's evolved in different areas. So, hunting seals in different areas requires different techniques. And so each of them has uniquely adapted to their specific area, wherever that might be.
That's interesting that you say you bring up the Arctic group, because not too long ago on the old Instagram, I saw a video. I don't know where it came from, who posted it, where it was, but it was, God, the most terrifying thing. It was of these little seals on a floating ice shelf, and like you can feel the interspecies humanity. Like you can see the terror, and these orcas coming, and they do a really cool thing where they like use their tails to pump the water down, forces a wave up and splashes this seal off the ice, and then where they can nab it. And it's like, it's incredible from like a predator perspective, but like so terrifying.
As a hunting technique, absolutely horrifying.
On that? Like, oh my God, that is a horror film.
It's also too like one of the creepiest things with regard to like orcas doing anything, because it's the one place that I've at least seen where orcas will look their prey in the eye before they eat it. For here, transients are super quiet and stealthy when they're trying to hunt, and then especially too is like we were talking about Patagonia. The whales and the seals on the beach don't know that the whales are there and coming. But for the whales on the sea ice, they see the orcas spy hopping beside each sheet of ice trying to see where it is. So you can see your monster coming closer if you're a seal in that instance.
Man.
Oh, horrifying.
That is terrifying.
There is a there's so many orca documentaries, but Bertie Gregory's Animals Up Close just did a specific like episode, like 43-minute episode on Antarctic killer whales, and it is some of the cleanest footage I've ever seen of the whole thing.
I follow Bertie. Maybe that's where the footage came from.
Very well could be.
Could have been. It was drone footage?
Yeah, he had drone footage. There was also like really close to the water. Like they had a lot of different stuff set up for that.
That's funny. Thinking about this episode beforehand and thinking about chatting with you, I was like mostly just kind of wrapped up in Salish and resident like orcas around here, but man, there's so many aspects. My mind is running wild now. So orcas are cetaceans. They are whales. They are mammals that have evolved. I'm just going to take this from you.
Yeah, please do. You're killing it.
They are remnants of Dimetrodons, which we are as well. So Dimetrodons were kind of one of the original reptilian ancestors that evolved into mammals. They have an extra cranial hole, which became their ear, and that doesn't exist in reptilians. And then so mammals evolved through basically cows that moved back to the water, and then all of their appendages have then fused into little foreflippers and then to a giant flipper tail. They're mammals. They breathe oxygen. Their nose migrated from the front of their face to the top of their head. And
that's there's more history. You kind of covered.
Did I cover it all?
I think that together we're going to really be able to paint a picture of killer whales really well. I think you got like from a couple million years ago up until more recent history, seeing where they are, and then
which just from an evolutionary journey is a pretty wild place to go.
Oh, absolutely, especially like between their relationship to us. I think their like closest relationship to any other land animal is like hippos. Mm-hmm. I'm pretty sure. But it is a wild thing to come onto land and go, no, I want to go back.
Yeah. And just living in those kind of like, I'm assuming it was like, I don't know, where it began, a brackish kind of environment. I remember I lived down in Australia, down on the coast of like Jan Juc and Torquay for a few years. And I know one of the early remnants, like one of the first pseudo whales is like the Janjucasaur or something.
That's fun.
It's not that name. That's a terrible rendition, but it has it has it in there. But it's one of the first ones where it's like you can see the fusing of the legs into a tail, and like longer flippers. I think the elbows were still part of the flipper.
Okay.
Whereas now it's basically just the fingers.
Interesting.
Of like bones.
Well, yeah.
Bones.
It's definitely like the hands. It's the same thing when you think about any winged creature when it's basically
Right.
They're just huge webbed hands that are working on that front. No disposable thumbs though. Mm-hmm. Not for the whales.
Yeah. So then obviously you have morphological differences that take on body fat, and their skin has gotten really thick. I mean, this is just general cetaceans, whales. Now, orcas are technically dolphins.
Yes, and I'm so happy that you started with the fact that they were cetaceans and the fact that they are whales but most people now are talking about, oh my God, it's amazing that orcas are dolphins, not whales. It's like they're both, which is a lot of fun, almost more fun, dare I say.
Right, because whale is the umbrella under which dolphins.
Exactly.
Yeah. So what makes them a dolphin? What is a dolphin?
So is
it the bottlenose?
Fantastic question. Bottlenose dolphin. There's dolphins. It's not quite
like
porpoises.
the facial structure.
It's facial structure. It's also speed. Think humpbacks have dorsal fins, but they're not as prevalent. Dolphins are also a form of toothed whale, so it's a delineation of that, right? So when we think about cetaceans, we think about baleen whales and odontaceae. Odontaceae are toothed whales, and then the toothed whales are broken up into a whole bunch of different sections because we have like sperm whales, and sperm whales are nothing like belugas and narwhals, and the belugas and narwhals are their own thing over here, and then there's dolphins and porpoises, which is the other aspect. There also might be more that I'm forgetting because there's beaked whales and stuff like that too. But
I was just going to ask about the beaked whales.
Yeah, there you go. On the same page. But with the dolphins, partially their shape, partially how can I put this? I don't think I'm going to be able to answer that question much better than that, to be honest. But yeah,
they're much more nimble and agile.
Oh, definitely. They can move through the water in a dime.
This is terrible. This is me anthropomorphizing it, but I feel like there's an element of play that exists in dolphins, all of those kind of species, that is maybe lacking from the other ones.
I mean, to a certain extent, it depends on, as far as anthropomorphizing go, which I'm all for in terms of like communication, because it's fun and it's exciting and it actually gets you to understand the animals a little bit better in a way that we
asterisk, we can't assume that we know what it's like to think as a dolphin.
Not at all. But
they seem to be enjoying their lives.
They do. And also, too, like from anecdotal experiences that people have had with dolphins, humpback whales, and I say humpback whales specifically because I've heard a lot of instances of people seeing like very complex dorsal structures with them, especially too around this area. I've made a lot of naturalist friends over recent years, especially to, I growing up and especially to coming into university and the rest. I was very, very, very focused on killer whales. This is only recently that my excitement has been brought into the greater cetaceans species, but there are a few within the cetacean community that like exhibit these behaviors that a lot of people they can't pinpoint for some reason or another. We can't help but anthropomorphize because we have no other avenues to understand.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to talk about their brains? Do you know much about brain development?
I know a bit about brain development. I know that for killer whales, they have some of the biggest brain-to-body ratios, which is one of the largest forms of like intelligence or like metrics of intelligence that people will use for animals. So that as far as just like sheer, amount of power and like consciousness that's used, that's definitely one huge part of it. In terms of like the biology of the brain, there's not too much that I can go into on that one specifically. I know I want to say Lori Marino, I could be very wrong, is a neuroscientist focused specifically on that. But another thing I know specifically before orcas is that whatever section of our brain that we've come to figure out processes emotions is exponentially larger within killer whales than our own. It takes up a larger portion of their brain than ours does in ours. What that means, how it's used, how we can interpret that, is definitely for scientists. But it's an it does provide a little insight, at least anecdotally, like we said, to what these animals could be experiencing.
That and the communication area. I heard the communication part of their brain is significantly larger than our human brain, which is an interesting thing to fathom, especially when trying to take into account this whole idea of anthropomorphizing things. Because it's like, how are we ever going to truly be able to empathize and understand what another species is feeling when like the very little that we know about them shows that they are such higher thinkers than we are?
Oh, totally.
And like, there's no way we would ever be able to even understand them.
No, and it doesn't seem like, with whatever technology we could even try to create, it's like there is quite literally a physiological barrier to our ability to understand what they could even be like to the level in which they're communicating. Like even between humans, we have a lot of trouble understanding each other at any given point,
even within one language.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And so to switch that out is definitely a challenge that people have been looking at it very, very, very closely, at least for the last 60 years, starting with John Ford in these waters.
So when it comes to orcas as the species, do you have any particular fun facts about them?
So the ecotype thing is one of my favorites to start with. And one of the things you mentioned before in terms of subspecies that I did want to bring up is that the residents and the transients here are the most studied populations of killer whales across the world. And so with 60 plus years of, 50 plus years of data, backing, their genetic differences, their morphological differences, and their social differences, both between each other and like what it looks like when they show up in tandem. On March 27th of this year, there was a paper that was released that proposed that they should become their own species respectively. So the residents and the transients, technically, if this went through, would no longer be technically orcas. There was two names otherwise given, but basically case was that there is enough genetic and morphological diversity between these two that it is grounds to consider them as separate species based upon our current understanding of that. That has since been gone, but the thing I'll say in terms of fun facts is to start with when we're talking about the differences between is like all the populations of orcas across the world have a lot in common in the same ways, in the same ways most species who evolve together do. But even within that, the amount of kind of specification and like divergence that they've had even across the species is insane, one, but two, it's cool to see that kind of divergence over hundreds of thousands of years and still see some things be very much the same between them. So that's the first one. The second I'll say is that we haven't the second one that I'll say is that across the orca kingdom, so to speak, the avenues of socialization consistently surprise people no matter where they are around the world, both between orcas themselves and with people. And, as far as human-animal interactions go, that's better than cows, which is like the only thing that I can think of right now is like a transfer of like something that, people will come in contact with in a lot of different places and otherwise. I don't know where I'm quite going with that, but yeah.
So even though they're the same species, I'm just curious, like, why are they not already regarded as separate subspecies? Because even if they are technically genetically similar enough to be the same species, the populations are isolated. Like, transients are in no way, shape, or form ever going to procreate with residents. And are the groups of transients, like you mentioned, there was Californians and Alaskans, like, are they separate? Do they interact at all?
They'll interact over certain ranges at certain points, and I also, like, I could be technically wrong on some of that front, but, you know, there are some transients that I can imagine that hang around here that would interact with Northern California transients
socially,
in some way. Like socially. Mm-hmm. I haven't heard of them going across, and the other half, in terms of, like, why they aren't considered subspecies, is a thing that's actually happened, and a conversation that's been happening across orca research for a long time now, is that the species itself is just data deficient. Like, one of the things, and the reason that we talk about the killer whales in the Pacific Northwest so much, is because we have access to them all the time, and not only that, we have thousands upon thousands of eyes on them every day because of their consistency around here, which is never a given. And then the other half is the geography of this area, because within the geography of this area, if you know that a killer whale is one place, a lot of people can, reasonably assume where it's going to go next. And if they don't, there's going to be in close enough quarters, there's not a wide enough area for them to leave to kind of miss them as they go. While that does happen, like, the amount of people that we have on the water at any given point here has been a huge kind of avenue to learn more about, like I said, the specific orcas within our waters. And so the proposal for the different species within these two is, like, the greatest amount of research we could possibly put. I don't know why they didn't do subspecies, and rather than, like, denoting them as two different species themselves, I might have to go back and check that. But, like, if there were any populations that it was going to start with, at the very least, these two would be the ones that it would be.
Because, I mean, everything about, like, first of all, between these different populations, there's a language barrier. Like, these whales have different languages based on how they communicate.
Absolutely, yeah, and different dialects between, once you get into pod specifically as well, which is, like, incredibly complex. And then, when we talk about residents and transients, not only do they not speak the same language, from everything that I've heard, and is very, very, like, eerie the way that they'll avoid each other, in the sense that it's not like they communicate and they're like, oh, I don't recognize that whale. It's, if they are around the same place 90% of the time, residents are very chatty and transients not as much, but the water is dead silent. They go on their separate ways. No harm, no foul.
Really?
Yeah. It is unspoken rule, completely understood as far as I have seen on that front, to, like, you keep your space, I'll keep mine.
So just to kind of backtrack maybe half a step.
Let's do it.
And define some boundaries here. What are transient orcas and what are resident orcas?
Let's do it.
And the northern and southern residents.
Yes. So transient killer whales, let's start there. Biggs orcas are mammal eaters to start with. Let's begin there. Those are the whales that will eat seals, sea lions, pinnipeds, pinnipeds, seals, sea lions, porpoises, whales as well. So do go after baleen whales, blue whales occasionally. So they are evolved to hunt and eat mammals, is the basic start with. Morphologically, you'll find that transients will have larger jaws. Usually that comes with, with this, it comes with, chasing after bigger prey, having a greater need for it. And in terms of, like, socialization, like I said, they're a lot quieter. They're very to themselves, because if they communicate, especially because they're mammal eaters, it alerts their prey, and they don't want to do that. So
they're the wolves of the sea.
They are the wolves of the sea, 100%.
That's kind of where the idea of a killer whale comes from.
Exactly,
the killers. They're hunting.
The
they're
killers
active.
of whales. Yeah. You exactly have it there, and that's specifically, like, that population is the one that would do that. And then morphologically, one thing that anybody can see, this is an untrained eye. If you look at a group of orcas and you don't see an open saddle patch, if it's a closed saddle patch and it's in the Pacific Northwest and it's the greater majority, there is a north of 50% chance that it's all transients. That is because residents, and I'm going to switch over to this now, one of the first difference between the two that I'll say is that residents have, like, open or closed saddle patches.
What does that mean?
A saddle patch is, that's totally fair.
What the hell is an open saddle patch?
So for killer whales, on their back, there is the dorsal fin.
Right.
And then just behind the dorsal fin was the area we'll call the saddle.
White, yeah.
And it is the white, and like just behind the dorsal fin is like a gray sort of like wisp is what I'll call it. Okay, so that gray wisp is either like, it either looks like this, and is like, this is the top of the
He's making
I'm making
a
hands.
U-shaped hand.
making a U-shaped
sign.
hand. It's either like
Yes.
collective, or it's like
And that's
broken.
open?
And that's and this is closed.
Oh, that's closed.
And then open has like a thing inside of it. So an open is like this, and then there's something in it. And then there's like an open
Kind of like a W, but like an artsy W that's separated, so kind of like two V's?
yeah, something like that. Something like
Okay.
that. Something like a
Okay.
U with something inside of it, and then the top is here, and so this is black, and the rest of this is white.
Okay.
Yeah, I can
Yeah.
provide you some images.
Sure. Yeah.
So in terms of like visually, if you see killer whales or images of killer whales, that's one of the ways to find the differences. Otherwise, though, residents are our fish eaters. So those are the ones that we hear eating Chinook salmon mainly, the king salmon here, the largest of them. But they also eat different other varieties of fish, chum, coho.
But they prefer Chinook.
They prefer Chinook. In terms of, if you've ever heard the term energy expenditure, so the amount of, the amount of food or prey that an animal needs to intake in order to maintain the amount of energy that it, uses to both get that prey and to exist beyond it. The energy expenditure for Chinook salmon is by and large the greatest by like an astronomical amount compared to all of the other fish. It is huge and fatty and like everything that they could need, because they get it's more fish per kill, so to speak, than most.
Well, I mean, especially historically, when you see like, photos even 50 years ago, 100 years ago, for sure, like the Chinook king salmon that were caught out of these waters back then, just put all of the fish that we see today to shame. There are photos of people holding up 130-pound, 5-foot-long salmon.
It's ridiculous.
It's insane.
It is a whole. It's a different world. People talk about shifting baselines and things like that, and so like with this, like that is one that it's hard for a lot of people to grasp how big not only they are, but they used to be.
Mm-hmm. And that's primarily because of a host of different stuff that I've talked about multiple times in this podcast, from overfishing, pollution, habitat degradation. Overfishing, especially through the 60s and 70s with canneries, really just did a number on those populations. And then all those other factors, fish farms included, like all sorts of these things, have really kept those populations from being able to rebound strongly. And I know when we talk a lot about protecting those resident killer whales, like protecting their food source is a big part of that.
It's huge, and there's like a lot of the times that they'll do population updates and things like that for any of the residents. A lot of the things, or the main thing that they're focusing on, is are they eating, and like how do they look in terms of like are they malnourished, are they well fed, what is the difference? Yeah, and so the difference between the northern residents and the southern residents, to go back, because you also asked that question, it's two separate populations, again, genetically distinct. I'm not sure for the difference between those two, but those two populations don't mix.
Oh, they don't?
Not at all.
Oh, I thought all the residents kind of like at least had some mixing, but I didn't realize.
Totally fair. And it's like an understandable thing. So it's the same ecotype, but very, very different populations. And so we haven't seen them cross paths enough to like understand that as an avenue for more breeding, because that's another thing that's happening with the southern residents, is just the genetic pool and the genetic diversity for a population is only so much. And then the other half with them for genetic diversity was captivity, and that's its own sort of can of worms that we can get into if you want later. But for the southern residents, right now there's between 70 and 75 of them. They mainly stay from Campbell River south. They can go they have been seen as far as Northern California. Largely eat salmon up and down the ways.
The residents. So they do go out to the coast.
They do go out to the coast, and so they also spend a lot of the greater majority of the year we don't see them. We don't know where they are. And so it's
really, we don't know.
It's a crazy thing, because
don't we have trackers on them? I would have thought
no. There's very few orcas that have ever been tagged and tracked in general, and so for killer whales, one of the reasons that they're not doing it as much anymore. There was one southern resident that they tagged, but the amount, that partially is the technology for tagging. They had arrows that they had to put into it that ended up getting infected, and I think that was a whole thing for them. Besides that, though, in terms of like understanding where they are, because we have so much information, like I said before, we have thousands of people all the time on the water checking to see where they are. The whale watch community is another big proponent in terms of like consistent updates and location around these areas. So there is a hefty network of quite land-based and boat-based sightings and people that are keeping track of these whales all the time. And the residents used to be, they were initially called residents because they were here every day. It was consistent and like absolutely no problem of like, oh no, they're going to be here, these months. They show up like a pretty solid amount of times during these periods. And then slowly that's shifted and the residents have been seen less and less and the transients actually have been seen more frequently over time.
And do you think that's just the residents trying to find different food sources?
I think there's a potential for residents trying to find different food sources. I think the transients are also finding a bit more success within these areas, and so they're hunting mammals, and so like there could be a thing where they're spending more time in the waters. That's quite literally just like a thought. It's not based in anything necessarily, but the residents definitely we've seen less and less of the more that we've also seen the decline in fish Chinook stock.
Right. Interesting.
Which is a hard one.
So it's a real citizen science led kind of like tracking.
Oh, yeah. And it's the systems and the networks in place are like, they're robust.
That's pretty cool.
It's amazing.
I like that.
It's really neat. One of the things that I was getting really excited about when I started, living here, and then especially too like right after the pandemic, was the setups of land-based whale watching around. I ended up making some friends within the industries, but there's land-based sightings groups in most places around Washington and British Columbia. Like every like nook and cranny has people that are like dedicatedly looking out their windows all the time, notifying, oh, there's whales over here, they're going over there. I think I was able to identify them. I know who I can ask in order to identify. Like, it is crazy.
That's like the retirement dream, to just be on whale watch.
Totally.
I'm going to stare at my window all day and look for whales.
I want to be right parked over there. It's going to be set up. And it's, just funny how, like, the whales will be going by a lot of the time people's backyards. Because it's just really like, especially too down, you're from down the States. And so like down the States, there's a whole bunch, especially too up here, any of the Gulf Islands, whenever I hear friends, anybody that's like, oh, I spent some time on Quadra, I'm like, I'm jealous.
Yeah. It's supposed to be amazing up there.
Oh, absolutely. Well, just any one of them around here, right? Like it's just ample opportunity.
Yeah. And like, so from Tacoma area, like most of my childhood life, like was familiar with the residents, had like a couple kind of cool encounters, but more frequently, the transients have been coming down. I think 2 summers ago, they came down into this like little bay where my folks live, and they chased seals. They were like actively pursuing a herd of seals, what, flock, group, school?
There's I think it's a G. Like I said,
a gang of seals.
Gang of seals, a gaggle. No,
I know it's a romp of otters, but
romp of otters is fun.
They were chasing seals, and that was a pretty wild thing to see in real life.
I still haven't seen a hunt myself, so I dare I say I'm jealous. But
granted,
it's really neat.
It's from afar. It's not as high octane as like the nature shows make it seem.
Oh, but you
see dots moving across the horizon, and you're like, oh, okay, you're making out what's going on. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I see more splashes and not just fins. This is a difference.
Yeah, but like within the resident population, because of those dwindling food sources, they've had to move out, and there's been a lot of drama with them over the years.
Totally. And there's a lot of drama with the research, there's a lot of drama with conservation, there's a lot of drama with policy, with dams, with whale watching. There's many different facets that people have. As of right now and for a while now, it's been all eyes on the southern residents.
Yeah, one of the things that I remember seeing a few years ago, the painful death of the newborn
Tahlequah, yes,
yeah,
or Tahlequah's baby. It was, and then
was it a stillborn or
no? I don't remember specifically whether or not it was a stillborn or whether or not she gave birth and then it died like very quickly. But then I believe she carried it around for at least 7 days, and
carrying the carcass of her dead baby.
Yeah, through the Salish Sea. like very, very, very apparent every day afterwards. People are like, she still has it. She still has it. And you can't help the feelings that like show up when you see something like that. And that's another aspect when you talk about anthropomorphizing. I'm like, there's got to be some universal truths, and that's got to be one of them in terms of the grief that can come with something like that. Especially too when it can come to a place where, you know, that she felt drawn enough to carry
right
for 7 days.
Right.
Or if, at least.
And it's such just a different social structure too. I mean, like, I think from a human perspective, like, and I don't want to say that this is strictly a human thing, but certainly in our kind of capitalist societies,
sure,
there is no time to mourn. There is no time to struggle. There's no time for trauma. You got to be working. You got to be grinding to exist.
Totally.
Got to pay your rent. You got to, like, you can't focus on those human emotions, those quote unquote human emotions. But seeing that in like another being is so powerful because you realize the kind of uniting empathy through these different species. Like, through, if I were to put a like species on a sort of pedestal, those with like these bigger brains who are able to like have these deeper emotions versus like a bacteria or a crab that might not have the complexity in order to do that. Like, there's this thing that's like, it's just so far beyond, like, for whatever reason, our societies have canceled out that bit of emotion.
Well, and like you said, capitalistic society, especially Western society here, it makes a huge difference for kind of how we'll engage with, one, grief, but also two, I found, you know, especially coming out here, it kind of changed a lot of perspectives on this, but like the idea of, and the conversations around death, right? Like the conversations around the idea of mortality and existence on, you know, a plane where we are in a lot of ways closer to orcas and, you know, otherwise than we are to the phones that we use every day in so many like visceral, like, you know, biologically coded ways. And so understanding and, like, you know, really sitting with those differences is something that I know I've done a little bit more of, especially to being in this part of the world kind of brings it out in you. It can, at least for me. But on that front, like, anytime, you know, you hear the stories of people, one, but the animals too, it provides such a different lens to, you know, the ways and the things that we might feel, that even if anthropomorphizing, you know, has its, you know, like ups and downs with regard to what it can mean for how we interact with species, but there's definitely something to be said for what we can learn for ourselves through them.
Mm-hmm. These capitalist systems notoriously are patriarchal systems. Orcas have matrilineal societies. Do you think there's a correlation?
I think that there could be. I think that there could be. I've found in my life women usually know best. But yeah, the orcas are largely matrilineal. It, like I said, with populations, it does vary to certain degrees, but mom and especially grandma usually know best. And, you know, a large part of that is teaching going down generations. They're orcas, and this is another aspect in terms of like the few species to put on a pedestal that can do these kinds of things, are one of the, I think it's 3 or 4 species, including humans, that live past their birthing years.
Menopause.
Yeah, they go and they actually go through menopause. So
and orcas can live up to like what, 60, 80 years?
60
right?
to 80 is a great range. Yeah.
Okay,
So for males, it's usually between, I think it's like 40 and 60, and then for females between like 50 to 80. It's a lot. Like, females live longer.
Wow.
That is a known thing. An aspect, and I think part of that too is like, you know, the role within. A lot of the males will, especially too in the resident community, not rely on their mothers, but like very much be at their side from the day they're born until either mom's gone or they're gone. And that's the way it goes. For any of the daughters, usually they'll end up, once they have their own families, potentially spinning off to like spend more time alone with their pods and otherwise. But you see them all come together usually, and, you know, depending on the matriline, you'll have various generations in one bit.
Mm-hmm. There's something to be said about taking care of one another, I think, along the way, and I think that is like a big thing that we could learn from. Sex and gender aside, it's just like there's that old slogan, you know, if you want to go somewhere quick, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. it's that kind of thing. It's like if we are taking care of everybody along the journey, no matter where we all fit within this pod, we can go further together.
I like that. Then I fully believe it's worthwhile. I know that, the greater majority of anything that I've done or like put together, it is the ones that not only do I like ask for help and seek community, but the ones where like it's done together that things have gone the best. It's been the most exciting too. It's like, it's more fun.
Yeah, and I feel like that's, again, anthropomorphizing. There's this element of like play and love. Like when you see, especially dolphins are known for that.
Oh yeah.
Just because they'll play with like the bows of, or the wake of bows of boats, and I know like there are cases where orcas have done similar things, but there's just like this element of like enjoying life when you have the time to. It's like I'm well fed. Weather's great. Like, let's play a little bit.
Absolutely, and consciously, like very, very intentionally going out and playing. It's a fun thing to do.
You mentioned the transients and residents steering away from one another in waters. This is a myth that I have heard. I'm seeing if you can bust it or not. I've heard that relatively, knock on wood, our coast is relatively free of sharks, especially great white sharks, which are more prevalent down in Oregon. I've always attributed it to the nutrient load coming off the continental shelf, which is much shallower in Oregon, as well as just south of the Columbia River discharge. But between the Columbia River and up through Vancouver Island and even up to Haida Gwaii, there's like a significant drop in the number of great white sharks. And I've always heard that it's been because the transients, because they threaten their food source, that if a great white does come into their area, they will actively seek it out and hunt that great white.
Interesting.
Have you heard of that?
So this is the first I'm hearing of this, which I'm also kind of really excited about. I think it's really cool and it's fun to like learn something new about this area.
Don't quote me. I don't know if that is true. That's what I've always heard.
That's totally fair. On the front of just great white being off of Oregon, because especially the sharks around this area is not a thing that I'm terribly, terribly familiar with. But my initial thought is transient killer whales. I think they've been known to eat a lot of things that you might not expect. They're supposedly, and I think I want to go try to find this because I've also heard that they've like eaten a deer before because deer can swim and one was moving across and they was able to catch one. Moose is a thing that I've like heard and seen, but it's not one that I can confirm. I don't think that it's happened or like that we know of. But with great whites, I wouldn't be surprised if generally they're steering clear because there's a lot of action happening here.
The great whites are steering clear.
The great whites are steering clear. I'm saying that like I wouldn't be surprised if because there's such great traffic of orcas, and I'll say this as well. Canonically, as much as the residents and the transients are like separate, the residents are the bullies. So the fish eaters are like the big bad guys in town, so to speak. And I think
the other whales.
I think it's a numbers thing. From what I've heard, it's like because residents travel in like pods of but like usually between like 5 and 10, or 3 to 7, but like around that area, transients will usually be seen in like groups of like 3 or 5.
It's much smaller groups.
It's much smaller groups. I wouldn't be surprised if great whites are lone sharks. So they come around and see a lot of another large animal in the area. It's like, I don't want anything to do with this.
Right. I always heard that they like not even sought them out to hunt them, to like eat them, but just to kill them because it's like, yes, to stay away from our food source. These are our pinnipeds and everything.
That's really cool. Yeah. I know a few people that are like working and like know people working up and down the Oregon and Washington coast, specifically like on the like Olympic Peninsula and then south. I'm happy to ask around to see if we can bust this one.
Get back to me on that one.
Yeah, I can do that.
Regarding the transient hunting style, because we talked about the Arctic ones, Arctic orcas, we talked about the ones down in Patagonia. What is kind of their hunting style here, the transients, when they're going after these pinnipeds or other dolphins?
Totally. So a lot of this is very strategic group attacks from different avenues. The one that I'll tell you just to understand, like to highlight the craziness of these animals, is for a pod of transient killer whales, if they're around a seal, sometimes they've been known to see the seal. It goes onto a little island, because we have a lot of little islands around everywhere, and like two of the four, let's say, would make a very big show of like, oh, we're leaving. They're like super vocal, and they're like splashing around like, we're going this way, and they'll leave. And there's another one hanging around the corner, and he or she's dead silent. And so the moment that the seal goes back into the water, that one comes around for the kill, the other ones turn around, and then they all have dinner. So that's one of them is like actually trying to literally trick seals into coming into the water, specifically on that front. And then the other is a lot of very fast, probably what you was talking about back in Tacoma, of like very coordinated group attacks on a single individual within like a pretty large body of water.
Yeah, it kind of reminded me of like, again, those Nat Geo things of like packs of lions like kind of cornering the slow little wildebeest and then like coming from all angles. And,
exactly.
Yeah.
And with this one, more so, you'll see transients like seals will only travel together every so often, but they'll very much tire it out. There's a big aspect within the killer whale community of like playing with their food in a lot of instances is one of the avenues for social interaction. So the transients over here are the ones that we'll see punting seals 40 feet in the air.
And is that, I mean, that makes if we're going to anthropomorphize it, that kind of puts a psychopath spin on it. Playing with your food with a live thing like that. I mean,
to a certain extent. And then like I think that's also where you can take a healthy dose of like, part of the reason that they might be doing that in any instance is to tire out and like tucker out the seal to be able to teach,
just kind of beat it up.
Well, to beat it up, and then you can teach your young easier how to kill it, right? Because then you can, if the seal is moving at a quarter of its speed, you can have the 4-year-old go try and figure out how to do this, and like after you just literally kicked the living crap out of a pit of bed.
I have a bit of a sob story here. Was that last summer? Two summers ago. It wasn't even summer. I think it was like pretty cold in the spring. There was a beached white-sided porpoise at this beach out on the coast. And I was one of the first people out there. And then two of my friends who worked for a marine rescue society were there. And the three of us, plus Parks, basically came to this whale and tried to get it back into the water. This thing, it was so heartbreaking. It was up kind of near the rack line, so it had like been beached at higher tide. The tide was out significantly, and it had just kind of like floundered and created this little divot in the sand in its own blood.
Yep.
It had like a one of its eyes was really bashed in and like fully swollen shut, and we got it into the, I don't know what you call it, the
sling, whatever
sling,
you can.
Yeah, the big Free Willy sling. Walked it to the water, and by the time we got it there, it had been like flipping and convulsing, and apparently, because their organs are used to being suspended, that when they're on gravity for that long, they can like collapse on themselves. So ended up dying. Like I'm
That's
like
so sad. Like right there.
Well, I wore waders because I knew it'd be getting in the water. My waders were dunked, and I was just like soaking wet, freezing cold, like holding this white-sided porpoise, and it dies in my arms. Like, oh god, it was awful. But we brought it back to the beach, and then we were like kind of trying to do like a post, mortem on it and figure out, and it was covered in these fine rake marks. And then after talking to some people, we learned that was because of the transients. The transients had likely been beating it up and had cornered it in this shallow bay and kept it from getting out. Then the tide went out to a place. It was like in the rocks too, kind of like this, but much flatter. So like there just weren't any avenues for it to escape. So it was just, and it was like beat up, bruised, covered in these rake marks, which would have been the teeth of the transients. So that's my sob story there. What do you have to say about that? Like, is that a common thing?
And as far as like cornering an animal, it's been seen in a lot of instances in general around, especially to the the residents like the rubbing beaches up there actually, but I can bring in another sob story that you've probably heard about that happened this past March, with the female transient and her calf up in, I think it's called Zabalos.
Oh my god, yeah, Zabalos.
Yeah. Where they were hunting seals in a shallow area. It was a kind of tidal, but like it was a river that was coming out. And in the process of hunting, the mother ended up accidentally beaching herself and drowning, and the little one, now known.
Oh, it drowned.
It drowned because when it ended up getting itself like stuck in the sand, what it ended up doing was trying to get itself out, and so by the time that attendants were on scene and they were trying to get a sling and to get it, I think this is what happened. The whale ended up going on its side, and no, it is definitely a tidal lake, and they couldn't turn it. And so when the tide came up, it ended up, this blowhole was covered, and that was it.
Oh.
And so the little one, Sgsmåþkvəy.
That's the name of the little one?
That's the name of the little one. Who was in there for about a month and a little bit, and then was able to go out with the help of the DFO, the First Nations communities there, and base etology.
Which would be a Ahedaset First Nation.
Ahedaset, yes, exactly. Thank you. And then, so the Ahedaset First Nation was actually able to not only get her to eat after a month and a half, but also helped to guide her out of that little cove. And she has been, there's been a sighting of a small transient killer whale since that they believe is her.
Is she reunited with the pod?
Not
Do
yet.
they know?
Not yet.
So she's just on her own.
She's just on her own. But supposedly there have been eyes, and she is okay for right now.
Speaking of orcas in the news, there's been some rad kind of eat the rich happenings going on over in Europe.
Big time. We love our Gladys whales.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about those.
So the Gladys whales are a group of 15 individuals. I got a lot of this top of hand. I just made a YouTube video that I haven't posted yet. It's going to be my first one. It's specifically because this is so exciting. As like a thing, there's 15 Gladys orcas. They are...
And is Gladys, sorry, is that like that's like a population?
That is, so the Gladys is a demarcator for all of the whales that have engaged with the interactions with vessels. That is a demarcator given on them. They are part of a larger group of orcas called the Iberian orcas. This is a group of about 50 individuals that's usually seen on the west coast of Spain, the north coast of the northwest coast of Morocco, and around the Strait of Gibraltar areas, the Iberian Peninsula, and the rest.
And these actually have a different coloring markings, don't they?
Relatively, they're a little bit lighter.
They have some gray.
They've got some gray. Yeah, they've got some gray. It's very, very different. So, one of the things you've probably heard of is white Gladys as a name. So, one of the things that they'll use for the various Gladys whales once they started naming them is a demarcator before. So, Gladys Blanca, Gladys Negra, Gladys Gris. There's a lot of shapes, or a lot of colors, and a lot of sizes. So small Gladys, whatever else. The greater majority of them are juveniles. And with everybody around there and the researchers kind of taking in these instances that have been happening for the past 4 years now, they've come to determine, as far as they can tell, that it's play. It is teenagers being teenagers, finding something very exciting to hang out with. A large portion of the vessels that they're targeting are sailboats with spade rudders. So it's a very specific kind of rudder on a sailboat that's pretty long. And so whenever a helmsman or helmswoman would turn the wheel, that rudder would shift, and the orcas in some ways would play tug of war with it. So some people are playing tug of war with orcas out there. And as of right now, I believe there's around 6 or 7 boats that have sunk in total. And I want to be very clear about these boats. Any vessel that has sunk, there's a few things to note. The first is that nobody's been hurt in this entire time. The second is they've sunk after the orcas have left, in some cases multiple hours, in most cases at least an hour. And the third is that the Coast Guard, in a large majority of these instances, would be towing the boat into shore with the vessel, and then in an instance called the Champagne, this was back in May of last year, I think, they towed it 11 miles before it finally was like, they were like, this isn't worth it to bring it back in because it's going to take on too much water. But that's 11 miles, 2.5 hours after the whales had left. That it ended up happening. And so this is not like, we're going down, we need help immediately. This is,
it's not like a Jaws situation where they're actively chewing the back of the boat trying to get the people in the water.
And the greater majority of instances that people will see the whales coming up, the whales will show up, they'll play with the rudder for a little bit, they might even go around your boat once or twice, and then they'll leave. This is like hundreds of instances of orcas. Quite literally, it's dare I say, like muggings happening all the time for them, and some of them are just their wallets are hurting afterwards, but they're not.
I was so excited to hear that they were teens because I'm like, yeah, it's the future generations fighting back, and then you're like, and it's play. I'm like, I guess that's.
Hey, what a great way to fight back.
Yeah. Are there like authorities trying to do something about this, or like are people pretty concerned? Because the media paints it in a very demonizing way, as the media does a lot of things. It's just making it seem like these whales are taking down every other ship that enters the water.
Not only are they doing that, but also the memes not only have been hysterical, but they're rampant. They're the amount of the orcas are now a symbol of what I would like to call the proletariat. There's quite literally the setup for there. Researchers in this area are trying to do a few different things. There is some avenues where they're trying to instill different physical barriers to the rudders in those on vessels going out there. So if you have a vessel, they'd want you to put like chains or things like that beneath by the rudder, so that while you're moving in, it's a barrier for the whales to get into it, and sometimes that barrier is just enough for you not to have to worry. That is the main one that I've relatively heard of. I don't know whether or not anything's been instated, but the other half is kind of boater education, because in a lot of the instances I've seen, the less that the boaters do, you shut off your engines, you're not moving, and you let the whales do whatever you need to rudder, is the best move. There's also talk potentially of getting orca insurance to be a recognized thing in Spain, which is another great avenue to the problem, if only because, and I talked about this before, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to say when I was talking about these whales, but the biggest part is that it's not our jobs to try to get the whales to stop doing it. It's our job to, one, deal with the consequences and mitigate that as much as we can on our front, because at the end of the day, we're in their waters. So for that, a lot of the aspects to try and mitigate are deterring them from the vessel as much as possible, and then education for people around to try and be as little exciting as they can be, as least exciting as they can be to these whales.
It's like any wildlife kind of thing. It's we can't tell the bears to not go into the trash cans. We have to put our trash in better trash cans.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
And so solving those problems.
Yeah. Crazy.
Yeah. And the one other thing I'll say about this, and this is the thing that's kind of a bit that I think would be really good for your audience to hear, and just people in general as you're going around, is that in these conversations, it's very easy to think that on the other side of the world, we're in the Salish Sea. We are quite literally pretty much on the other side of the world from this area. What are we going to do to help protect these whales one way or another? But a lot of the people that are out there right now in the water with these whales are horrified because of the media outlets that are going around and the conversations that are happening, and the fact that this is a big whale and it's on my boat, and that's scary, and that's understandable. But some of the people there are dumping fuel into the water when the whales arrive. Some of them are shooting fireworks at them. Some of them are quite literally trying to take out guns on these animals, to the point where the Spanish Civil Guard has at this point already arrested somebody for animal harassment with this population specifically. But on that front, I believe very truly that having these kinds of conversations with people around, trying to add a little bit more nuance to the story of the orcas being the proletariat, makes a difference. Because it's so funny. The amount I have not had this much orca meme fulfillment in my life. And it's wonderful. It's just that extra bit to add to help satiate, people who are interacting with these animals, not only here, but around the world, but specifically in the place where, somebody's taking out fireworks and guns.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, those whales are just lucky they didn't try that in the States. They'd all be dead by now.
Yep. Yeah.
AKs.
It's a shown thing. I don't know if we both Americans feel very safe in this space, but like I recently got permanent residency, and I can't say anything but the fact that I feel like Survivors Guild is a very strong.
Congrats. Welcome. I'm a dual citizen, so yeah.
Congrats.
I don't wear the American flag badge too often these days.
It's fair.
Yeah, that's wild. I guess we're kind of wrapping it up. Is there anything else that you would like to chat about or talk about?
I've got orca stories galore, but I think the one thing that I'd love to kind of pose to you, especially to you're staying, on mainland for a little bit, is those land-based sightings networks that exist. It's a really cool thing, especially back in 1970, it was an orca census was put out. It was the first one of its kind to try and get a number of killer whales that existed within this area so that they could have a number for fish stocks, and fish stocks is in like capture stocks for killer whales as they were going. And so the biologist who was tasked with the challenge at the time ended up sending sheets to lighthouses, people who lived across the the water and things like that, fishermen, to get a count of all of the orcas on the same day. And that was the origin of the beginning of like research as we know it about these killer whales. And now, with especially to the advent of online, I was saying about phones earlier, but they are cool with regard to what they can do for, conservation and otherwise in many ways, especially with what we do.
Citizen science kind of documenting.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so these networks do exist. They're very, very, very robust, and I think everybody should go check them out.
Amazing. Just as kind of like a closing question, what is it, do you think, about orcas that have really as far as like charismatic megafauna goes within our society, like what is the draw for humans? Obviously there was Free Willy, big 90s blockbuster hit is going to do it to a whole generation, but like why do you think there is this connection to orcas?
I'll give you two answers. The first one is they are like physically some of the most striking animals that exist. With regard to any like species in the animal kingdom, you see pandas with this like really stark black and white, and I know reptiles are also very good for that. But for orcas having, the very, very distinctive features to begin with, it's a thing that I think a lot of people can identify. And like, part of any sort of connection is being able to identify at least like a part of an animal or otherwise, to be able to get that immediately. And then the other half, I would say, is especially in recent years, orcas, ever since we've started spending more time with them and paying attention to them, have not stopped surprising anybody that's been around them. From the very beginnings of kind of like Western interactions with killer whales here in the Salish Sea, up until recently when we have, people up and down the coast, both on land and on the water, consistently being amazed with the things that the orcas are doing, like Sďwəkaʔ with her calf, or way back when Paul Spong and Skana. If we want to go all the way back, we can go to Namu and Ted Griffin, who was the first man to ever swim with a killer whale, and the killer whale didn't eat him, and that alone was such a incredibly strange thing for people to attribute to. And so,
especially back then,
absolutely, yeah, it's just an absolute fear, and that there's, that's a conversation for another day if you'd ever want to. It's one of my craziest like hyperfixations about this time. But to give you the long and the short of it, it's like we have this animal that for every reason, like everything points to them wanting to kill, and everything they show us is that in a large portion of the time they don't, and they care in ways that confuse us, and like it forces kind of a mirror back on ourselves in a way that a lot of people who are around and in nature aren't prepared for. And I think that kind of like strikingness of, or that juxtaposition is, if you can get yourself to stop as existentially that makes it, that makes an impact. And within the culture that has, through education, through documentaries, in some ways through captivity, like it just in regard to our knowledge of them going forward, like that's been able to span to the masses with Free Willy, in a way that for a lot of other species, like you don't see to the same degree.
And I think there's a lot of unlearning that we have to do as a society. Like when you call something a killer whale, it paints a certain picture in your head. Is there an effort to rebrand them as the lover whale, maybe, or something like that?
I mean, if we wanted to start that here, I think it's totally possible. I also know for myself, I'm stubborn in the instance of a lot of people online will say that you shouldn't call them killer whales, and I do fully understand the connotation, and I believe that there are time and spaces where that can be used.
And an orca is already just such a great word.
Oh, it's
just call them an orca.
So simple. It's so fun. Yeah. It's so easy. I for one know that like to talk killer whale out of my vernacular would be challenging. It's like smooth one to use, especially to growing up with it. But like with regard to that, even so, like the killer whale as a power, I don't know. It's still like a kind of like a humbling thing to say. I am going to call them lover whales now, like off the cuff, like for no reason.
I really liked what you said about it turning a mirror back to ourselves, because I think that speaks a lot to us as a species nowadays, especially in light of everything happening in the States in particular, but all over the world. Like there's, we've always assumed that they were killer whales. We've been terrified to swim with them because we think they're going to kill us because they're killer whales. Killer whales have never attacked a human in the wild. They've only attacked people
once.
In the wild?
1972 was a Californian surfer. It's the only time ever recorded, and to be honest, makes it even more impressive. Because if there's one instance we know that it's happened, and it's like, yeah, it has happened. It's happened once.
But if I recall, they bit him and then went away.
Left.
Yeah,
and it
killed him.
No, absolutely didn't. It quite literally it bit, it left, and as far as I understand too, the guy was like that. I was in their space. Right. You got 120 stitches. It was a big thing, but that is quite literally it, and it was not. He was completely okay. It has never been seen again. People have been in the water with killer whales in a lot of different places around the world all the time.
And especially way more humans in the water nowadays.
Oh, absolutely.
And okay, so that, the only time it's ever killed a person has been in captivity, which when you look at the circumstances of that, like severely traumatizing environment, like that is just like insane. So when we think back to like ourselves as humans and like rethinking what it means to be human, like there's this idea like we think things, or we have this fear of how things are because we've been told that that's how they are, we've been told that things can't happen in a certain way, and we need to like get to a point when we can be comfortable, dare I say, dabbling our feet in the waters again and like relearning how to like see these animals, see ourselves, see society and the world we live in a different way, and not let these ideas of the past that aren't even necessarily true, but just like that we've been caught up in, like
absolutely
keep us from moving forward.
I think it's a great kind of note to end on that front, in terms of like, as it's amazing to be able to learn about these animals, and it's, very important to protect them in the area around, and also to understand what we can learn. There's a lot.
So for every podcast episode I do a donation to a nonprofit using the funds from those who support this Nerdy About Nature project on Patreon. Is there a nonprofit that comes to mind who you would like to give this episode's donation to?
Actually, that would be fantastic, and I'm really, grateful for this avenue. Orca Conservancy. It's a organization down in Washington. Recently they're doing a lot of different work, but one of the most recent things they did was work with the Coast Guard, to teach them how to, disperse killer whales for anything that's going on. So if there's testing going on, or if they're trying to get orcas away from like a spill or anything like that, because the Coast Guard is also responsible to oil spills, they started a relationship with them to train, as an instance of that response, how to kind of clear the area of marine mammals, but like specifically killer whales. And so that's a project I'm very excited about. They also do a lot of education stuff that I'm very a huge fan of and like very, very impressed with.
Yeah. Do you know the website there for people to check out?
I believe it should just be orcaconservancy.org or come. If you look up Orca Conservancy, it will show up.
.orga.
.orga? Oh!
Where can people go to learn about you and all you do?
If you go to theorcaman.com, actually, if you want to do a website, that's the easiest bit. On Instagram and TikTok, I am on there just as the Orca Man.
Easy.
Yeah.
What do you think the average person can do to help protect orcas and their habitat and everything, or what can they do to get involved? What is kind of like the most important thing for people to be aware of?
I think the greatest thing that people can do for orcas in any instance is to get more in touch with your local community. And when I say community, I don't necessarily mean the people that are around you. I also mean the space. It is the greatest thing that we can do for our planet, as far as I've come to learn, is to understand our role within our local spaces, communities, ecologies, and then the facets of how they're connected. And so broadening the way in which we think about the place in which we live allows us to find other avenues to care for it, because it's very easy to throw your apple core on the street when you're seeing it as a street. As soon as you start to see it as part of a larger system, all of a sudden that becomes a much more complex nature that hopefully people will want to take care of, because it's specifically the place in which they live. So with regard to orcas, the greatest thing that you can do for them, and also the greatest thing you can do for you, is to pay attention to your local ecologies and try to learn a little bit more about them wherever you are.
Amazing. Love that.
Fantastic. I really so greatly appreciate you having me on for this,
man. It's been great. Thanks for saying yes and for meeting me out here.
This is pretty serendipitous. Did the sun just go down?
It just went down. Beautiful sunset here.
That's fantastic.
I might just wrap this up for everybody who's viewing this on the old interwebs with a gorgeous little sunset.
That is hard to beat.
Out of Vancouver, BC. Out here on the Salish Sea. What a beauty. Thanks so much for joining me, Fred. Appreciate it.
Likewise, man. I'm so happy to be here.
Woo. Well, what a bunch of fun, fascinating info we've got there. I was totally flippering out at times. Oh, God, I'm sorry. That is so bad. These puns, they're not getting any better. Thank you to everybody for joining me today. Thanks to Fred for taking the time. As I mentioned in the episode, this whole Nerdy About Nature project is supported by folks like yourself on Patreon and Substack. And for every episode, I make a donation to the nonprofit of my guest's choice using those funds. And today, Fred chose to give his to the Orca Conservancy, which is orcaconservancy.org. So I'll throw links to them in the show notes, as well as links to where you can learn more about Fred and the work he does at theorcaman.com and at Orca Man on all your favorite social media channels. As I mentioned, Nerdy About Nature, this Podchat series, the long-form, short-form videos you see all over YouTube and Instagram, and the long-form writing I've been doing on Substack, all of it is a passion project that is supported by folks like yourself on Patreon and Substack. So if you're enjoying what I'm doing and want to help see it continue into the future, you can help support it by becoming a Patreon subscriber at patreon.com/nerdyboutnature or on Substack at nerdyboutnature.substack.com. Either way, really appreciate you being here. Without you, none of this is possible. So thank you so much for tuning in and supporting. And now it comes time for me to wave you goodbye. One more final pun for the road. Hope to catch you all next time. Thanks so much. This episode of the Nerdy About Nature Podchat series was produced by me, Ross Reid, and made possible with support from individuals like yourself. For ways to support this project and to learn more, check out nerdyboutnature.com or at nerdyboutnature on your favorite social platform.